Today I played the most PvP intensive game ever. Hunting down overpowered players? Yup. Getting insanely lucky loot? Of course. Dying with all my gear? Unfortunately. This game gave me a wide variety of rage and excitement, so let's get right into it. I played 100 Days of Albion Online. I began my voyage on a mighty galleon coming from the old world. Next thing I knew, I was sailing in a treacherous storm. My ship crashed and I had awoken on a beach in the lands of Albion. Once I woke up, I immediately made my way up the beach where I found a crafter and a smith. They had told me that I wasn't the only survivor and to go take a look at my crashed ship from the top of the lighthouse that we were under. My ship was completely destroyed and there were these weird crazy looking people blocking the bridge that led inland. When I came down from the lighthouse, the crafter had told me that I should make a sword from the raw materials around me, and then he gave me a shield. He then directed me to cross the bridge. The gates leading to the bridge swung open, and I ran right for the treasure chest that the crazy people known as the heretics were guarding. I killed all 4 of them with ease and had gotten a helmet from the chest. The game then explained to me that you get fame every single time you kill an enemy, and it levels up these special little nodes in your destiny board. So, fame is pretty much the same as experience points, and the nodes are how many levels you have in a specific item or skill. After the little lecture, I quickly sprinted to town. Once I arrived, I found out that the small town was called the Cove. There, I met Captain Tia, who directed me to the marketplace to buy a mule. This was great because I now didn't have to walk everywhere. A crafter who goes by the name of Silas told me how to craft my own tools. These would allow me to get higher tier resources to fix a broken crane in the town. When I gathered enough resources, I returned to town to turn them into refined resources at their respective buildings. I then gave Johansson, the crane fixer, whatever he needed, and Captain Tia gave me some carrot soup as a reward. She told me that there were some maps that needed to be stolen from the crazy heretics and quested me to go nearby to an encampment and steal them. I recovered the maps and had to fight my way through tons of enemies. The enemies were really easy to kill, and I killed enough mobs to unlock the trainee fighter node. This node allowed me to gain fame from killing enemies in general. Quickly, I returned to Captain Tia with the maps, replaced my tier 1 items with tier 2 items, and found out how to escape the little island that I was on. I arrived at a poorly constructed fort and immediately created a distraction by killing heretics and lighting their ammunition storage on fire. The ship to escape the island arrived, but before boarding, I went back to the marketplace in the cove and bought a couple extra mules because I knew they would sell well in other cities. Finally, I boarded the ship and made my way to Swamp Cross. I was greeted by a royal soldier and a royal commander. The royal commander gifted me 3 days of premium for free, which is a paid membership of the game. I then made my way to the market where I sold all of the lower tier items I had and the extra mule for around 5,500 silver. The royal commander gave me some simple quests, and then I bumped into this mysterious guy who told me to have a look around and then gave me a piece of gold, which is equivalent to 4,500 silver. I was now sitting on top of 10,000 silver, which is not bad for the first 20-ish minutes of the game, and after seeing how much silver I accumulated, I headed to the nearby city called Thetford. I arrived in the city and quickly explored it to see all of the different features that it had to offer. There was a market, a bank, and many other buildings. I was nearing around 30 minutes of gameplay, so this summed up my first day. In Albion Online, 1 day is equivalent to around 30 real-life minutes. My goal for day 2 was to upgrade my items to at least tier 3 if not tier 4. So the first thing I did was head out of Thetford. I traveled to the southeast into a tier 5 yellow zone called Willowside Marsh. In yellow zones, there can be PvP, mainly PvP flagged players. They can kill you, but you won't lose all of your items if they do, and you'll slowly revive. I immediately tried to kill some of the mobs, but my items were no match for the bigger tier 5 enemies. However, I did find out that I would be able to kill some of the smaller tier 5 mobs, which instantly leveled up my Journeyman's fighter nodes, allowing me to wear tier 3 items. After killing a few more mobs, I unlocked the nodes I needed to use most of my desired tier 4 items. I also unlocked the Journeyman Adventure node, allowing me to wear tier 3 bags, capes, and use tier 3 mounts, and the Journeyman Reaver node, increasing the damage that I deal to tier 3 mobs. I returned back into Thetford. There, I chose to buy a Mercenary Jacket, which allows me to heal when doing damage, a Scholar Cowl, which provides defense and energy every time I get hit, and Soldier Boots, which allow me to sprint faster, but also heal while sprinting. I realized that I leveled up the node to use tier 4 Fire Staffs. This was an issue because I wanted to use Curse Staffs. So, I had to buy a tier 3 and a tier 4 Curse Staff. That way I could level up the node that I need to use the tier 4 staff. For my offhand, I ended up using the Eye of Secrets, which gives me more energy. I then went to this mystical wizard channeling a blue portal. There, I got to select my very first expedition. I chose a tier 4 solo one and entered the dungeon. The rules were simple. I had an hour and I had to kill 1 boss and 5 special mobs. So, I got clearing. Once I killed the 5 special mobs, I attempted to run past all of the remaining ones right to the boss room. There, I found the Crazed Fishy, who was a warlock, and the Crazed Chops, who was a melee DPS. I first took out the warlock as he provided a buff for his partner. I then made light work of the Crazed Chops. The boss fight was incredibly easy, which made me think that I might have been a little bit overgeared for this expedition. I was rewarded with some silver and an Adept's Royal Sigil from doing the expedition. The sigil sold for around 6,000 silver. I still didn't unlock the node to use tier 4 Curse Staffs, so I headed into Sleetwater Basin, a tier 5 zone, to kill mobs. I then spotted a tier 5 solo dungeon that I obviously went into. The mobs were pretty overpowered and almost downed me. This made me realize that I needed a way to do solo dungeons. After killing a few more open world mobs, I unlocked tier 4 Curse Staffs. It also appeared to be nearing the end of day 2. I returned to Thetford, sold my mule, and bought a tier 3 horse, which is much faster. I began day 3 by scouting out which nodes to progress. I then headed out of Thetford on my new trusty steed. This random mist portal closed right in front of my face when I was exploring. So, I wasn't going to let the game do me like that, and I started the search for another mist portal. Of course, I killed mobs along the way, and unlocked my Adept Adventurer node, allowing me to use tier 4 bags, capes, and mounts. A common mist portal appeared, and I tried to enter it, but this annoying frog stopped me. I had to do what must be done and take out this pesky frog in order to be able to enter the portal. When I arrived in the mist, it was eerie, but it had a magical feeling to it. I arrived at a fort-looking formation on the map, only to find a heretic encampment. The game tasked me with killing the mobs until I reached a certain amount of fame in order to get a reward. This was pretty easy as these were some basic tier 5 mobs. I even got a drop worth around 18k, so I was ecstatic. The camp awarded around 4,000k fame, 1.4 thousand silver, and 413 Brazilian favor, which can be later used to enter the city of Brazilian. I then freed some wisps from captivity, rewarding me with fame and favor, and I also cleared another mob encampment. Right after, a turbulent mist appeared on the minimap out of nowhere. It was calling for me, so I went to go check it out. That was when a mysterious stranger pulled up wearing all tier 6 gear. It appeared that he was willing to fight me over this activity, but being the brave lad that I am, I decided to try and take the fight. It actually went a whole lot better than I thought it would. I unfortunately do go down. However, I think I downed the mysterious stranger as well. The reason being is they had curse stacks on them when I was teleported out and around 60 HP, so they were still receiving damage over time. Once I was out of the mist, I headed to Thetford. My items had to be repaired, which costed me around a third of all of my silver. This was annoying. I then headed to the market and sold all of my loot from the mists. This brought me to around 46,000 silver. So I decided to upgrade my cape, which increased my average item power to over 700. And I also bought a tier 3 bag to hold more weight in my inventory. Day 4 was epic. I made it my goal to save up enough silver so I could buy a Hellion jacket, which would make a lot more activities accessible to me. This way I could earn silver a lot quicker. I restocked my healing potions and bought some goat stew, which increases your damage by around 5% when it's eaten. I wanted to redeem myself from the previous day, so I headed out to the good old Willowside Marsh to find a wisp to take me back to the mists. Once I arrived, I immediately saw a turbulent mist that I headed over to right away. Luckily, no one interfered, and I was able to bring the weakened mist across the zone into the weakened wisp sanctuary where I left it. I was rewarded, and then I started to clear mobs in an encampment nearby. When I was clearing, I started to hear some noises that sounded like fighting. I went to go see what it was, and it was another mysterious stranger. I inspected their equipment and saw that they had around 1026 IP and was using a clarion blade. I then tried to lure them into some mobs and dismounted to fight them. This was going to be a hard fight as they had 300 more IP than me, but here's how it turned out. I did it! I killed someone who had 300 more IP than me. I was so satisfied because I was able to redeem myself with the Turbulent Mist, as well as I was able to redeem myself in PvP. This brought me to the end of day 4, so I headed back to Thetford and sold my loot. I started off day 5 by buying a tier 4 Enchantment 1 Hellion jacket. This jacket deals damage to enemies that stand near you and gives you health for each enemy that is in range of the area of effect. With the Hellion jacket, I could now sign up for the arena. I wasn't sure how long the arena queue was going to be, so I grabbed my tools and headed to Willowside Marsh to start gathering. I killed mobs in between gathering materials, and I ended up unlocking the Expert's Adventures node, which allows me to use tier 5 mounts, bags, and capes. I then continued to kill mobs and gather when suddenly a join arena message prompted. We ran to the middle of the arena and started an all-out brawl. Things didn't start well as we lost the first engage, losing one of our teammates, which ended up subtracting 2 points from our total 150 points. Then, the enemies captured 2 towers, making our score go down by another 20 points. We only captured 1 tower, so the enemies lost 10. We were down 128 to 140 and things were not looking good. Right then, another one of our teammates died again, costing us another 2 points. Thankfully, once the towers could be captured again, we captured 1 tower and got 1 kill, which evened out the score a little bit. We then happened to get another kill and another tower. The score was now 126 to 116, which was great. The enemies captured a tower, and it was now tied. And then both teams captured a tower, continuing this tie to 106 to 106. Unfortunately, this broke when one of my teammates died, so we were down by 2. It was at that moment when I started to step up. I got 1 kill, making the enemies lose 2 points, and immediately after, got another one. My teammate also happened to get a kill at that exact moment, so we were now up by 4 points. This was close. This game of chicken continued to play out until we were down 18 to 16. I captured a tower and then got the final kill to win this incredibly close arena battle. I didn't do too shabby for my first arena. Once the arena was over, I opened and used my rewards, gathered a little bit more, and then headed back to Thetford to sell everything. Day 6 wasn't very eventful until the end. I started off by looking at the city faction flagging. While flagged, you can earn extra fame and even earn these things called faction points, which can be redeemed for very juicy rewards like faction chests. I flagged for Thetford, the current city that I've been based out of, and then checked out all the different missions that the faction had to offer. I then decided that I needed more money to even try to do these missions, and headed out to gather and fame farm mobs. While I was on my journey, I found an area that had 7 frogs all together, so I took advantage of it and quickly gathered all of them. Right when I was about to head back from the day of gathering and fame farming, I noticed that there was a chest on the map. I quickly headed over to it and invited the people around the chest to my party because I knew I couldn't fight them off. A lot of people showed up. Even a mostly 8.3 nature healing build arrived to fight at the chest. This was going to be crazy. I didn't realize it yet, but a lot of the people around me were faction flagged. So, that meant that I wouldn't be able to attack them and they couldn't attack me. I was able to open the chest and quickly snag 2 tomes of insight before anyone else could and then run out of there. This was helpful because I returned to the city and was able to sell all of my loot to reach a total of 104,000 silver in my inventory. Although day 6 wasn't too eventful, it was still very profitable. On day 7, I used 80,000 silver to buy a 4.2 Shadow Collar. This is a very good weapon for doing solo fame farms with a lot of mobs. I then headed to Willowside Marsh and then Sleetwater Basin to try and start getting some spec in my Shadow Collar nodes. Once there, I earned the bronze reputation after only killing a couple mobs. A bronze logo now appears next to my name, and what this means is that I'm in good standing with the royal cities. You can go to bad standing if you kill a lot of players in the red zones. A chest appeared on the minimap, so I went to go check it out. That's when a full 8.4 ganker tried to kill me. He had over 2,000 IP, so I quickly mounted up and knew that the chest was a lost cause. The area was hot, so I headed over to a big, scary group dungeon and decided to go in there to avoid any more red players. Once I entered the dungeon, I saw a group fighting a big mob. After we killed the mob, they invited me to their party to come fame farm with them. This was awesome because I found a group to do the dungeon with right away. The dungeon was incredibly fun to do and really was worth it as I was getting a lot of loot drops and levels in my items. We stumbled upon a chest, a boss, and another team. So we invited that other party into ours and we killed the boss together. I only got around 12,000 out of the whole chest, but it was better than nothing. Day 7 started to come to an end, so I checked my inventory and saw that I had 38,000 worth of items, which is not bad at all. I didn't want to lose this group, however, so I used my day 8 to continue fame farming with them. We got another couple chests, and my reputation increased to silver. After a day of fame farming, I headed back to Thetford, where I sold all of my loot that I got from the dungeon and ended with 105,000 silver. I went on a spending spree on day 9. I first bought a 4.2 Scholar Cowl and then 4.3 Soldier Boots. The reason being is I wanted to give Corrupt Dungeons a try, and you need a minimum of 800 IP to enter the lowest level. So, I equipped my one-handed curse staff, which is better for PvP, and my new gear, and rode out to find one. There were a bunch of mobs and mini-bosses throughout the dungeon, so I quickly decided to come up with a strategy to kill all of the mini-bosses and skip a lot of the unnecessary mobs. From doing this, I reached 100 infamy, which, in theory, should make my loot drops in the Corrupt Dungeons a little bit better. I finally killed the boss, and the loot was not terrible to my surprise. I then entered another Corrupt Dungeon and had the same mini-boss strategy. While killing some mobs, an intruder started to invade me. He was using a similar build, but had more IP than me. That was such an intense fight because if I would have waited any longer to use my E, I would have died first. The enemy did however down me afterwards, but I still technically won. I quickly did the final boss, grabbed my loot, and went to the city to sell it. Right before the day ended, I bought a 4.3 Limhurst cape which regenerates energy when it gets too low. I knew for one of the future days I could now switch to an offhand that increases damage, and I didn't need to use one for energy anymore. Day 10 started off perfectly. I headed back to the static group dungeon, but on the way I spotted a small chest. I quickly arrived and immediately tried to join the group of people standing on the chest. They thankfully accepted it. The area around the chest then started to enable PvP, and things got chaotic. Someone tried to use an AoE on the chest and one-shot everyone who was in my party. But their plan was foiled as we all just moved out of the way. Things were not looking good for that guy. I was even able to get an assist or a down as someone was low HP and they were running away. Once we opened the chest, I got around 70,000 worth of loot from it, which made my day very profitable. I then went to the nearby static group dungeon to see if I could solo it. I was able to kill all of the smaller mobs, but not all of the bigger or enchanted ones. So I killed certain groups of mobs on the outside. I then wanted to see if the inside would be any different when soloing, and went in it to fame farm for the rest of day 10. Right when I started to head out of the dungeon, this random player invited me to join their party. I couldn't resist more fame farming, especially with a partner. So I accepted the invite and we continued to clear mobs. Luckily, we both were using solo clearing builds, which allowed us to sustain big groups of enemies. There were a couple of close calls though, as I almost went down, but somehow survived. After my new fame farming partner and I got done, I returned to Thetford, repaired my gear, and sold all of my loot. I noticed I had a significant amount of silver, so I invested in a 4.3 Musac. This item increases the damage of my auto attacks and my ability damage ever so slightly. I didn't get much loot from the static dungeon on days 10 and 11. Because of this, I decided to do corrupt dungeons for all of day 12. The first time I did a corrupt dungeon, I received a lot of loot from it, so this seemed like a good use of time. I then grabbed my solo fame farm set because I wanted to clear mobs as quick as possible. I knew there was a risk of someone invading my dungeon though, so if this happened, I decided that I would just run away because I was not in a PvP set and couldn't take them. Surprisingly enough, I didn't get a single fight while doing the corrupt dungeons, so I ended up dedicating day 13 to doing corrupt dungeons as well. The 2-day bender of doing CDs was pretty successful. I got so much loot from this activity that when it sold, I had 147,000 silver in total. I then went and bought a Swiftclaw, which would allow me to travel much faster to my destinations. As much fun as the corrupt dungeons were, spending 2 whole days doing them made me want to take a break. I remembered back on day 2 that I entered a tier 5 solo dungeon. The solo dungeon was too hard for me to do at that point, so obviously I didn't do it. Now that I had much better gear and some spec, I decided that they were worth trying. I started to clear the mobs at the entrance and got to work. Unfortunately, as I was clearing, a player who was faction flagged for another city dove me. I knew that I really couldn't fight this player in my mob killing build, so I tried to run for it. Sadly, I didn't make it out alive. I really didn't understand how this player from another faction knew that I was in the dungeon until 2 friendly players walked in. It appeared that they might have been scouting for him and saw me go in. Thankfully, I was only in a yellow zone, which meant that I respawned on death when killed by someone in another faction. When I respawned, I found another solo dungeon and made sure no one was nearby when I entered it. I then killed mobs until I arrived at a shrine. The shrine gave me some weird speed boost, but I wasn't complaining. I then fought my first boss in a solo dungeon. From it, I got some tomes that gave me free fame when used. Afterwards, I encountered some more mobs and then a final boss. I killed the final boss pretty quickly and opened the chest, which only had 6k worth of loot in it. That barely covered my repair costs from being killed by that one player. Day 14 was disastrous. I was pretty salty about day 14 because it really didn't go too well. Day 15, however, I planned to be a chill day. I just wanted to fish and gather resources, which are the most relaxing activities in the game. I bought a tier 3 fishing pole, a tier 3 chopping axe, a tier 3 skinning knife, and a tier 3 sickle. I then headed out to the nearby zones to start fishing. It's a pretty fun activity to do because you have to keep an icon of a fish inside of the green part of a meter. I started to fish next to this random guy and tried to make friends with him. Randomly, a small chest appeared on the map, so I wanted to go check it out as I've had good luck with these in the past. I did what I always do and joined the party of random people that were hovering around the chest. Luckily, we were all Thetford flagged and I got around 80,000 silver from this particular chest. This already made my day profitable, which I was super happy about. After the chest, I started to gather pelts, wood, and fibers. I compared the prices of all the resources and discovered that the pelts were the best selling, so I could make a decent amount of money off them. I stumbled upon a random mist zone that I was hoping to find lots of skins in, so I entered it. Unfortunately, I didn't find many skins, but I did find an epic mist portal inside of the mist zone. I of course entered it. From that point on, I just gathered in the zone until the end of the day, which is when I headed back to sell all of my resources and loot like usual. Since I was back over 100,000 silver, I wanted to upgrade my gear once again. I figured it would be a good way to start day 16. I bought some tier 4 relics and headed over to the artifact foundry. I gave the warlock working it the relics and my 4.2 scholar cowl. They upgraded it to 4.3. I then wanted to do the crystal arena as I had not done it yet. So I grabbed my PvP set and queued up for the crystal arena. Once we got in, things started off really badly. The game just started and we were absolutely getting destroyed. The match went by so quick that I vowed not to do that content again for a little while. There was still 16 minutes left in my day, so I decided to do a tier 5 expedition. I just ran through all of the mobs that I didn't have to kill, and I made it to the boss area within a reasonable amount of time. A lot of mobs actually surrounded the boss, so I tried to kill the boss and all of these mobs together. I was expecting this to be a little bit more harder than it was, but I killed the boss pretty quickly. I got some silver and the sigil from the expedition, and that summed up my day 16. On day 17, I headed out to kill mobs. I ended up getting really lucky and killed a random boss mob which dropped around 100,000 silver worth of loot. What I thought was going to be another chill fame farm day actually turned into something much more. I saw 2 big blobs on the map fighting each other. Naturally, I went to go check it out and my game became very laggy. I had to lower my graphics settings for this huge fight, as if I didn't, the game was unplayable. I then joined the other Thetford flag players, and it looked like we outnumbered the current enemies by a lot. This was going to be an easy fight. I at the time was engaging in content known as ZVZ, or Zerg vs Zerg. It just means that 2 really large groups of either faction flag players or different guilds and alliances fight with large armies. We obviously ended up winning the fight as we had so many more players in our Zerg. There was even a couple of different engagements and we happened to win every single one. After that, we started to capture outposts and had a few more encounters with the opposite factions. In order to capture outposts, you have to kill all of the waves of enemies sent at you, as well as the lord that defends the outpost. We did this and were able to capture multiple outposts, and it looked like we were going on a whole crusade. At that moment, day 17 felt like the best thing in the world. It was awesome seeing 2 huge groups fight over outposts, as well as we even had a cool battle that took place on a bridge. Towards the end of the day, I received the rank of recruit for the Thetford faction, and before I knew it, day 17 came to an end. I continued to do faction warfare on day 18 because it really didn't make sense to go back to Thetford. So, I stayed with my Zerg flipping outpost until it started to get small. I then went to the faction captain in Thetford and bought a chest with the points that I had earned from the warfare. I got some really good items and sold any loot that I also got from the chest. I really wanted to push the limits on day 19. I knew it was time to go into the Black Zone. Equipping gear that I wouldn't mind losing, I headed right to a random Ava portal in Willowside Marsh. In the Black Zones, if you die to another player, you fully die. This adventure was going to be dangerous. Right when I entered into the Roads of Avalon portal, I looked at my map and made my way over to a giant green chest. Once I arrived, I didn't see any chests or bosses, so I ended up going to the next one knowing that it must have just been cleared. There was actually a boss and a chest at this one, so I got pretty excited. I started clearing the mobs around the chest, but I started to have difficulty as the Avalonian mobs were very challenging. The chest better be worth all of this work. It was just me and now the boss, head to head. I attacked and the boss attacked back. They did this weird AoE where a beam swept the area. I went down to the boss sadly and got back up. But right when I was getting back up, these 3 random reds came. I panicked and ran into a few mobs and did the stupidest thing that I could. It resulted in me dying. This is my first full death. It's really funny because I got an achievement that said "Welcome to Albion." It was triggered from me dying in-game. I knew that this was not going to be the last time that this happened. After I died, I decided to research another weapon that I could use for solo clearing Ava chests. I came across Nature Staffs. This brought me into day 20. I didn't have the required nodes on my account to use tier 4 Nature Staffs, so I ended up buying a tier 3 Nature Staff and using a few tomes to get the fame that I needed. I then went to a random Ava portal and entered it. A gold chest was sitting on the map, so I decided to check it out. When searching the chest area, I saw that there was an orange boss defending the chest. On my first attempt at killing the boss, I got completely destroyed. I accidentally stood in this random AoE that the boss charged up, and it basically insta-downed me. I had to come up with a clever plan to beat this pesky boss. So, I ended up coming up with riding my mount in circles around the boss, and when he charged his AoE, I would dismount and do some damage. Even though this strategy was going to take forever, I thought that it would be worth it as this was an orange boss guarding a gold chest, and gold chests are usually meant for giant groups of players. I realized that day 20 was already over, and I went into day 21 still taking down the boss. To my surprise, this strategy seemed to be working out well. After a while, I finally killed the boss, and I only got 28,000 fame from it. That honestly didn't seem worth it. I then tried to open up the chest, but to my surprise it didn't let me, and all of the mobs nearby started to attack me. That chest was a lost hope, as there was no way I was going to kill all of the mobs quick enough before they respawned. I shouldn't have even been trying to do a yellow chest in the first place, because they're meant for larger groups up to 15 players. So, I ended up going to another zone and heading to a green chest which was meant for 1 to 2 players. There was a red boss on it, which is the best kind of boss that can be on a chest. Sadly enough, the nature staff that I brought was really bad for killing these mobs, so I had to head back to Thetford and buy a curse staff and a different nature staff to try out. By the time I made it back to the Ava Roads, I was in day 22. I headed back to the same green chest with the red boss that I attempted on day 21. Unfortunately, this was going to cost me. 2 gankers pulled up out of nowhere when I was clearing mobs. They attacked me at first, but then they invited me to their party, and we actually ended up clearing the mobs together. Things were going well. Too well. I had a hunch that they were maybe going to betray me. And of course, right when we started doing the red boss, the 2 players kicked me from their party right when I had the boss's aggro on me. I stood no chance and went down, of course. This was a betrayal. Since I died 2 times in the last couple of days, I decided to take it easy and just go fame farming in the usual tier 5 static dungeon that I always go to. I honestly was using static fame farming as a therapy for my dying. Things were going well, and then I spotted a small chest on the map. I ran over to it and got down as I rushed into too many mobs. I realized that as I was waiting to get up, day 23 was already over. Once I got up from being down, this random guy tried to steal my chest. I had to outdamage him on the final mob that needed to be killed in order to claim the chest. Thankfully, I was able to get the chest and get some okay loot. I then headed inside the dungeon, cleared some mobs, and then got bored and came out. Once I arrived at the chest, there were 3 other players on it. 2 of them happened to be Thetford flagged, which was ideal. The chest popped, and it was a purple enchanted chest. This meant that it was the second best enchantment in the game, meaning more loot. I was able to grab over 100,000 worth of items from the chest, and I was being a total loot goblin. I felt bad as I snagged a lot of the chest and not everyone else was able to grab items, but I definitely made a lot of money from it. I then headed back to Thetford and repaired my items, costing me a total of 40,000 silver. I used day 24 as a fame farm day and spec'd up my items in the static dungeon. The only cool thing that happened was that I got the guard rank in the Thetford faction. I had a late start on day 25 because I was looking at items on the market and just researching different builds that I could spec into. Once I finished my research, I decided that I was going to dedicate as much time as I needed to finally finish an Avid chest by myself. I equipped my regular Blackstone gear and headed out to find an Avid chest. I found one and started to clear it. The mobs defending this chest were pretty easy, but once I got to the boss, I started to struggle. I came so close to killing the boss on my first attempt, but I couldn't. I kept trying and trying, but nothing was working. I then headed back to Thetford in defeat as day 25 came to an end. Like I said, I was determined to finally kill an Ava boss and get the chest. I upgraded my gear as I didn't want a repeat of what happened on day 25 and headed out to the Ava roads. I found a chest that had 2 mobs positioned together and they were impossible to kill in a duo. So I wasn't able to do this chest. I continued scouting chests on day 27. Towards the end of the day, I approached a screen chest that didn't have a boss guarding it. Even if I got the chest without killing a boss, I would count that as a win. So of course, I started clearing mobs. To my surprise, I cleared all of the mobs with ease and was finally able to open my very first Ava chest. Honestly, the loot was kinda bad. Also, right when I killed the last mob, I received my Grandmaster Adventurer node, so I could now use tier 7 capes, bags, and mounts. On day 28, I headed to a random black zone in search of solo dungeons and upgraded mobs. Unfortunately, the footage of me actually going to the Thetford portal and entering my first Outlands black zone got corrupted, so I don't have any actual clips of the beginning. I kind of just explored the black zone on day 28 and killed random mobs. It wasn't that much different from the yellow zones, except that I could fully die here. I continued to kill random boss mobs until I stumbled upon an enchanted solo dungeon on day 29. This solo dungeon was in a tier 7 zone and had blue butterflies on it, so I guess you could consider it a 7.2 solo dungeon. I was very hopeful that I was going to get very good loot from this activity. The mobs were taking a pretty long time to kill. This is reasonable though, as this is a 7.2 enchanted solo dungeon. After killing a few, I entered this giant open room where I could kind of make out this really large chest in the shadows. I went down the staircase and kept clearing until I got to the center of the room. It was a golden chest. These are the best enchanted chests that you can get, and you always want to get them. The only issue is they're super rare. I started to kill the boss, and that was when I realized that 30 minutes had already gone by. This meant that I was now on day 30. This was going to be epic, as my first action on day 30 was going to be opening this golden chest, and oh boy was it an amazing start. I finally killed the boss after learning its rotations, and I walked away from the chest with 460,000 silver worth of loot. I was so happy. The last 5 days have been really hard, but this was my break. I then continued to clear mobs, as this was not even the final boss. Once I made it into the boss room, I saw that there was a purple chest. I couldn't believe that I had gotten a gold chest and now I was about to get a purple chest. Sadly, I wasn't able to kill the final boss though. I tried and tried, but the boss just did way too much damage. So I ended up giving up and leaving with my 460,000 silver. I teleported right away to Thetford and repaired my gear and sold all of my items, which brought my silver balance to around 420,000 silver. It was going to be hard to top day 30, so I knew day 31 wasn't going to be amazing. I started it like I had most of my other days and finding an Ava portal. As usual, I entered and headed to a random chest. I started to clear the mobs and decided to try out my new nature healing staff. Of course, immediately once I started to use it, I got dove. I was already low from mobs and was executed almost instantly by the diver. This kind of brought down the high from day 30, so I decided to do some safe content, but first I changed my offhand to a 4.3 crypt candle in my fame farming set. I also upgraded my shadow collar from a 4.2 to a 4.3 with relics. I then went to fame farm at the tier 5 static dungeon like usual. While there, my character reached a reputation of noble, and shortly after, a chest decided to spawn. I went to go claim it, but this random dude decided to troll me and attack me while I was opening the chest. This makes you cancel opening the chest, so I didn't get any of the loot because another person fully looted the chest, leaving only tier 4 souls. I was a little bit frustrated about this, so I headed back to fame farming. On day 32, I bought myself a cheap set to go do some more solo dungeons. I figured that if I got good loot from the last one, then the next one should be pretty decent. I then headed into a black zone near Thetford and scouted for a tier 7 zone to look for solo dungeons. I found a 7.1 solo dungeon and went into it. There were only 2 chests in the whole dungeon, and the first one was pretty terrible. I only got around 14,000 silver worth of loot. The second and final chest was average, as I got around 43,000 silver from it. I couldn't believe it. It was already the end of day 32, and it had taken me all day to finally find the 7.1 solo dungeon and do it. I teleported out of the solo dungeon and started to head back to the Thetford City portal when I saw an epic mist. I was super excited as an epic mist sounded like it could be a gold mine. When there, I started to clear mobs at an encampment, and of course, I started to get dove right away. I was in the middle of fighting mobs and tried to mount up, but I couldn't get away as they stunned me in place and I got dismounted. It seemed like every single time I tried to clear mobs in the black zone, I would always get attacked by someone. I figured that I would give gathering in the black zone a try. I bought a cheap set and some cheap tools and headed out into the black zone near Thetford to start gathering hide. I gathered until the end of the day and headed back to the Thetford portal when I bumped into a stranger and I randomly asked them if I'd be able to kill them to get my first kill. They said sure, but once I dismounted, they started to attack me. We fought it out until a random snake finished him off and I got my very first full death kill. On day 34, I legit did nothing except gather. My Adept's Animal Skinner node went from 4% to 9% by the end of the day. I needed to get this node to 20% filled with fame so I would be able to use learning points, which are given from doing weekly challenges, to fully learn the node. I would skip from 20% to 100% by using these learning points. Unlocking this node would then allow me to use a tier 4 skinning knife and other skinning gear. I went out to gather again on day 35, but there was a huge blob of Fort Sterling flagged players. It was not safe to gather here, so I ran into the static dungeon and tried to hide away from the blob. That was when I saw a boss mob and I immediately started to do it. Some random player came by and tried to sabotage me from killing the boss. They brought over some random mobs in the middle of when I was doing the boss, so that way I would go down. I tried my hardest and killed the actual boss to get a nice 23,000 silver from the chest. I then went to gather for the rest of day 35 until I sold my loot. I ended up reaching around 15% for my Adept's Animal Skinner node, and I bought an Animal Skinner tome which adds around 1,000 gathering fame to it. Once I used it, I was at 18% complete with the Adept's Animal Skinner node. I was super excited because I was going to be able to use the learning points very soon, once I hit 20%. Day 36 was a milestone for skinning as I gathered until I hit 20% on the Adept's Animal Skinner node. I then used the learning points to unlock the rest of the node. This meant that I could now use tier 4 tools. So I headed to the Tavern market and bought myself a tier 4 Avalonian skinning knife that increases the speed of gathering tier 4 skins or lower by 10%. I also bought tier 4 skinning gear, which increases the amount of skins that I received, obviously while skinning. I then went back out and started to gather. For day 37, I continued to gather and even went into the mists. Halfway through the day while gathering and doing some research, I found out that in the Black Zone you get more fame when skinning. So, I went to the Thetford portal and started to gather in a Black Zone nearby. There were a bunch of tier 5 snakes, which was really cool. When it came to the end of the day, I sold all my skins like usual, and to be honest, I really wasn't that impressed. I could have gotten more loot from doing the Black Zone solo dungeons. Since gathering wasn't really working out for me, I decided to do another solo dungeon. I grabbed a cheap set and found a solo dungeon in a random tier 7 Black Zone. The first boss was guarding a tome chest, which I got 6 tier 4 tomes from. The second chest had only tier 4 runes and some tier 1 money bags in it, which was terrible. The last boss chest was decent though. I got around 63,000 silver worth of loot. Although the solo dungeon wasn't amazing, I was happy with the loot. It was more than when I was gathering at least. When I ate out of the dungeon, it was already day 39. I saw a circle boss right when I left it, so I started to kill it. This boss gave me around 45,000 fame. I then found a random Avalonian mob holding a chest. These sometimes are called Pokemon as a joke. They literally fly around holding chests that you can steal from once you kill them. There was also around 45,000 silver in the chest. This was awesome as I now had a lot of loot. I teleported back to Thetford and sold all of it. I wanted to do my first Black Zone Corrupt dungeon, so I went out to find one and found 2 tier 5 circle bosses. I killed them both but got garbage loot. So I entered a random Corrupt dungeon and started to clear it. When I was in the middle of clearing, I started to get invaded. If you break all the crystals in a Corrupt dungeon, it safely removes the intruder, so I tried to do that. Unfortunately, the intruder caught up to me, and I was killed as I was on low HP getting attacked by mobs. I got really salty and decided to search for a guild to join. I used the guild finder and tried to look for one that does PvP, but also does a lot of PvE. I came across this guild called the Crimson Brotherhood that I applied for as it fit almost all of my requirements. On day 40, I got accepted into the guild. This took the whole day as I had to do an interview, which I was asked questions like if I was a spy, and other random things like what my favorite content was. I didn't want to record this interview just for the privacy of the guild. After my interview, I was told that the hideout is in a random Avalonian zone that they call SQQ. So I had to go and try and find it. I headed out to a random Avalonian portal and was on a lookout for a zone with that name. Obviously, I didn't want to die with any loot while looking, so I went naked on a horse. After spending an entire day searching for the hideout, I finally found it on day 42. There was actually a whole route posted in the Discord on how to get to the hideout from a certain city portal, so I wasn't happy that I wasted an entire day looking for it. Once I arrived at the hideout, I immediately checked the map to see its layout and set my home. When you set your home, it allows you to respawn in that location once you die, which is super useful. I then teleported the Martlock, grabbed a bunch of gear that I wanted to bring over, and headed out. In this gear, I included my expensive fame farming set and a random cheap set. I finally was able to use my expensive fame farm set on Black Zone mobs during day 43. The hideout was in a good location because there were 2 Ava chests that always seemed to have a boss at them. I was so hyped, so I cleared the chest area and headed back to the Martlock portal zone. Once there, I sold the little loot that I got and bought some food that I needed to bring to the hideout. I then actually rode to my HQ. This ended the day. Day 44 was the most profitable day that I've ever had. It started off with me going out with my expensive fame farm set. I found this random guildmate who I asked to do chests with. He agreed and said that there was a guy near him. We then tried to gank him, but I didn't have enough damage because I was using a mob killing set, so he got away. We chased him down, and all of our pings caused some random alliance members to pull up. It was funny because this guy said you suck, and a minute later, we ganked him. Literally after we ganked that one guy, the same exact situation happened again. We found another person to gank and almost killed him, but he got away. Now exactly 7 minutes later, we saw him clearing mobs, and this time we weren't gonna let him get away. I almost costed us not getting the gank because I decided to use a slow ability to attack him when he tried to mount up. If I would have just used an auto attack, it would have been a lot quicker. Thankfully, I still prevented him from mounting and we were able to get the kill. I grabbed 810,000 silver from his body, and the guy who I was playing with said that I could keep it all. I was so hyped as I got 800k from this kill, but I felt bad that I really didn't do much to deserve it. I deposited all my loot in the hideout and my guildmate had to go. This led to day 45. I went and scouted out 2 new zones that were now attached to our hideout zone. The first one being a bunch of skinning areas and the other one being a whole lot of chests. I decided to go and check out the chests and found an orange boss. I sadly wasn't able to kill the orange boss alone, so I headed back to the hideout zone SQQ trying to find a guild member that would help me. I was kind of annoyed because I literally spent the whole day trying to kill this boss. On day 46, I found 2 potential guildies who wanted to join in on doing bosses. We headed to the orange boss and cleared it out with ease. It definitely was worth it because we got around 113,000 silver from the chest. We then stumbled upon a red boss. Once we arrived at the boss, of course the mobs decided to respawn for no absolute reason. So we had to clear all of them again and then finally kill the boss. This chest was pretty garbage, but it was better than nothing. Since the 2 of us had a decent amount of loot, we decided to head back to the hideout and stash. We then headed back out to clear more chests. The first boss we encountered was yellow, and the next one was red. Luckily, the red boss's chest was purple. I received 400,000 silver worth of loot from the chest. My luck was insane. Day 47 started with another red boss. The chest that the boss was guarding was a purple, and I got 400,000 silver from it. This was a repeat of the red boss on day 46, which I wasn't complaining about. We then continued to do another 3 chests and got some decent loot from them. This hot streak of chests and bosses continued into day 48. On day 49, I planned to transport all the loot I was getting from the last couple of days to the nearest city. I for some reason had the spidey sense that I needed to scout out the route before taking all of my expensive loot on it. I then noticed that there were gankers ganking the whole zone I would have had to travel to transport my loot. Good thing I did this because there's a chance that I would have died and lost all of it. I jokingly dismounted and told one of them to fight me as a naked, and they clearly killed me. After I was killed by the 2 gankers, I did some housekeeping. I went and enchanted my one-handed curse staff with random runes I got from activities. There wasn't too much time left in the day, so I went to the Martlock portal and I redeemed a Conqueror's chest from the Energy Manipulator Warlock. I opened the chest and got some pretty decent loot. I then used books to spec into some items that I didn't have unlocked yet. On day 50, I went to the Guild Island just to check it out. It was pretty cool as there were many structures almost like it was its own city. There was even an arena with training dummies in it that you could attack. After some time passed, I went back to the guild hideout and decided to scout out a path to the nearest city. I figured that all of the gankers should be gone by now. I ended up finding a random open chest on the route that I didn't even have to kill any mobs or kill any people to get the loot from. There was around 26,000 silver in that chest that I just got for free. I even found another chest and a dead body of someone who just got ganked on it. I opened the chest and it had 24,000 silver in it. I was surprised that I got 2 free random chests without doing any work at all. I then continued to scout out the path to the nearest city. Even though this seems a little bit repetitive, I wanted to make sure that the gankers were gone because I didn't want to lose any loot at all. I was pretty shocked though because this concluded day 50 and I had already completed 50 out of the 100 days. I finished scouting if the path was clear on day 51. I then gathered some of my loot from the guild hideout and hit the roads. Of course, I saw some gankers, so I quickly ran the other way and easily avoided them. I was slightly annoyed because of course once I bring loot on the path that I had just scouted, gankers appeared. Once it was clear, I made a break for it and had finally made it to the Fort Sterling portal town. I was planning on leaving the guild that I was in because it wasn't really a good fit for me and I played at a different timer, so the only content I got to do with them was clearing those random Ava chests. I ended up heading back to the guild hideout, grabbed the rest of my loot, and transported it back to the Fort Sterling portal. Once finished, I had left the guild. I then searched for another guild that did content during my timer, and the one that I found seemed very active, so I wanted to get enough fame to apply to it. I started the fame farm at the nearby static dungeon because I needed to increase my total fame to over 10 million. This was one of the guild requirements, so I had to meet it to apply. Time went quickly and I headed back to the portal zone towards the end of the day. I decided to get risky and took my expensive fame farming set to the black zone because I wasn't happy with the amount of fame I was getting from the static dungeon. In my expensive fame farm set, I randomly explored the black zones and killed any boss mobs that I came across. From certain bosses, I was getting around 50,000k fame just from the one kill. The fame was insanely good, so I planned on doing this for the next couple of days until I reached the 10 million fame goal. I continued killing boss mobs into day 54. Nothing exciting happened, except at one point I thought I might get ganked by these two gankers that ran up on me. I survived and made it back to the portal town at the end of the day, and I finally had reached my goal of 10 million total fame. Day 55 was exciting because I got accepted into the guild. I ended up spending almost the whole day going through the Discord and getting all the information on builds used in content and where the different hideouts were located. This literally took up the whole day. After I got acquainted with the guild and Discord, I tried to go and remove my portal bindings so I could use the Limhurst portal town. I wasn't able to as I needed to wait a certain amount of time before I would be able to do that. So I headed off naked on a horse through random Ava zones, hoping to find a portal that led into a zone near the hideout. Luckily enough, I did. I made it to the hideout zone and set my home so I could respawn there now. This took up all of my day 56. My plan for day 57 was to ride to the Limhurst portal zone, as it was the closest portal zone to my hideout. Once I did this, I would be able to remove the portal binding and teleport to the Limhurst portal zone anytime I wanted. I also wanted to transport some of my gear to the new guild's hideout. That is exactly how my day went. I rode to the portal zone, grabbed some gear, and headed back to the hideout. I then killed some random bosses and mobs on the way and then arrived at my hideout, ending day 57. On day 58, I prepared to go ganking. One of my guildmates asked if anyone was interested in ganking, and obviously I was down for it. I didn't have the proper gear to gank, unfortunately, so once again I had to head back to the Limhurst portal and buy some gear. I bought a Thetford cape, which deals damage to an enemy when you use your first auto attack. I then also bought a curse staff, which I've been using quite a lot, a crypt candle for the huge ability damage increase, hunter boots, which increase my crowd control time when using my W ability on the curse staff, a fiend cowl which can be used to remove people's boots abilities, and an assassin jacket that makes you turn invisible and do more damage for however long you're invisible for. The whole concept behind small group ganking is to hold a target in one spot while doing a lot of damage to kill them. That is exactly what our plan was. Once I was all geared up, I headed back to the hideout. We had left the hideout to start ganking on day 59. Our group consisted of 5 total members. Right before we actually left our hideout zone, some of the guys were bringing back an orb to put into the hideout. These orbs are used to power the shields protecting our HQ, and the shields prevent people from being able to destroy them. After that, we noticed that a nearby castle was being messed with. So, we went to go check it out, and surely enough, there were people there. No actual fights broke out, but we kinda just messed with the few people in the castle from the gate. After that, we got a random chest in an Ava road and set up our ganking route. There was a transport route between the two portals, so my team picked that location and we all were scattered across the road. One person was to stay mounted and alarm when someone was coming, and the others would be ready to catch them. So as you can see, I saw a guy and alerted my friends. They tried to catch the enemy and I came up from behind. My friends easily dismounted the enemy and we finished him off while chasing him. I began to wait for the next victim of our ganking group on day 60. Right when we actually killed him, I was able to catch another player that might have been guarding him while he transported. We successfully ganked both of them. After chasing down some more prey, we discovered there was a large aspect in the Ava zone that we were in. Aspects are basically these mobs that contain a lot of gathering resources on them. When these are killed, you can skin them for an insane amount of time and skins. So, we killed this boss, and the guys of the gang squad started skinning away. On our way back, we taunted some guy on a stag and went towards the hideout. We encountered some guildmates doing a spider right outside of the hideout, so we decided to help them out. Once inside, all the loot from the whole session was put into a split tab, and we were each able to take 728,000 silver worth of loot from it. I grabbed my split of the loot, and we then headed back out to the Ava roads to clear group Ava chests. The mobs gave a large amount of fame and were quite fun to kill. We did this for all of day 62, as these chest areas took a long time to clear, but the fame was definitely worth it. On day 63, we finally killed the boss of the Ava area that we were clearing for the past couple of days. I got around 552,000 of my own loot, and the whole chest was just shy of 3 mil. Right after looting the chest, someone in the group noticed that the Ava portal closed soon. So we all raced to the portal area as fast as we could, and only some of the group members were able to make it out in time. Everyone who didn't make it out R'd back to the hideout, which basically just teleported them, and the rest of us walked it. I was happy because it was a super profitable day, and I was able to open a Conqueror's chest at the end of it, which always has good loot in it. On day 64, there was talk about a potential Avalonian dungeon raid, or just a fame farm in general. I spec'd into the Weeping Repeater as it is the easiest build to use in Avas or fame farms. In each Avalonian raid, everyone needs certain builds to make it efficient. So that's why I needed to use a Weeping Repeater. I then sold everything I had in my chest in Thetford, bought the build that I needed for the content, and ran to our hideout. I finally arrived, set home at the hideout, rerolled some items to get better quality, and started to fame farm random mobs while waiting for the group content. Day 65 did not turn out the way that I really wanted it to. I ended up wasting the whole day waiting as something happened to the people who wanted to do the content. So I kinda just sat in the hideout for a full 30 minutes. Day 66 wasn't much better. I spent most of the day waiting until a random guildmate and I just decided to go and rat the nearby static dungeon. I had to get some spec in holy staffs, so I used a Tome of Insight and a tier 4 holy staff, and then used learning points to learn the node. My guildmate graciously gave me some healing items, and we were finally able to head out on day 67. On the way to ratting the static dungeon, we luckily ran into a Pokemon that dropped some decent loot in its chest. We then entered the static dungeon and skipped to random boss mobs and started to kill it. That's the definition of ratting. I really thought that it was going to be hard, but to be honest, it wasn't. It realistically just took a long time to do. Thankfully, my guildmate was a veteran and kind of walked me through what I needed to do step by step. Once we killed the boss and some mobs around the area, the chest opened, but it wasn't the best. We then repeated this process with another boss in the dungeon and still didn't get the best loot. On day 68, we opened the third chest of the dungeon and finally got some better loot. While heading to another part of the dungeon though, we bumped into some other rats and we did our best to avoid them. We then did a random boss on the outside of the dungeon, which was super easy. The chest ended up being purple, and oh boy, it made our dungeon ratting worth it. Right after this chest, we returned to the HQ in order to deposit our loot, and then we got invited to do a group dungeon with some other guys who wanted to do the content earlier. On day 69, one of our group mates popped a group dungeon map that actually appeared in the open world. Once we arrived, we were waiting for the rest of the team because they were taking a minute to come over, so we started to clear mobs, and before we knew it, everyone was there. The mobs were getting decimated as our team had a very decent IP. The first chest was a purple one, and I got around 212,000 silver from it. This really made the dungeon worth it. The final boss only had a blue chest, which wasn't really that good, as we hoped for more. After the dungeon, we made a swift stop at the hideout to drop off our loot. It was already day 70, and 2 of our group mates had to get off, so the 3 of us that remained decided to go clear some Ava chests. We first actually had to find a suitable Ava road, and once we did, we started clearing a blue chest which was meant for a 5-man group. We cleared the whole area and got the chest, which only resulted in us getting 52,000 silver worth of loot, but the fame was what we were there for. Day 71 was kind of a repeat of day 70, as we just went to go deposit our loot and headed back out to clear more Ava chests. This continued for day 72 and 73 as well. Day 74 was allocated to be a transport day. I had recently just got a lot of loot from all the content that I was doing, so I grabbed around 112 million worth and headed out to my normal transport route that I take. I made it to Limhurst and started selling my items. I then decided that I wanted to get the achievement for traveling to each city at least once, so I teleported the Bridge Watch and then to Caerleon from the World Traveler. This was an incredibly easy achievement to get, and I got it. I then teleported back to my hideout and organized my chest with items to be transported and ones that I use. I received a ping in Discord one night prompting me that our guild was massing for an Avalonian boss skip. I then quickly hopped on and started day 75. I needed to make sure that I had the right abilities on my spear to skip portions of the dungeon, so I used a Tome of Insight that I had in one of my chests to get more levels into the spear nodes. I then bought an expensive light crossbow build, rerolled the quality of a few items, and went to the guild island where we were massing. Not everyone was there yet, so we were all just dueling and killing some time as we waited for the rest of the party to mass. Day 76 was go time. We all went off the guild island and to the southern gate in the Limhurst portal area. The Ava portal that we opened was close to it. Once we all piled into the Avalonian dungeon, we started skipping the mobs. The idea was to skip to the boss room, as the boss provides a fame buff when killed for several days. This buff increases the fame you get from killing PvE mobs. Along the way, there were these random gates that were placed throughout the dungeon that we had to destroy. They served as a good barrier for knowing if anyone was diving the dungeon while we were in it, because they respawn and alert people in the dungeon when destroyed. We then approached the boss room and it was glorious. We then put on our expensive boss killing sets and we got to work. The boss had a bunch of abilities that we had to dodge and take into account while doing it. He even did this one cool AoE where multiple swords would appear and spin in the AoE, doing a ton of damage. We went into day 77 killing the boss. He was pretty much dead in the first couple of minutes of the day. A huge shrine then opened up and we grabbed the fame buff from it, resulting in me getting an achievement. Once that was all done, we teleported out of the dungeon and ran back to the Limhurst portal zone. I deposited my expensive light crossbow set and we decided that we were all going to run back to the hideout. So that is exactly what we did. Once we arrived at the hideout, I set home as always and unloaded the gear that I brought with. We then geared up for a small-scale fight and headed out of the hideout. Day 78 did not go as planned. We were roaming the zones right when we saw 2 huge blobs on a castle. They outnumbered us quite a bit, so we decided not to get involved and headed to a random outpost. It appeared that it was being taken by this random group, so we dismounted to fight them. For some reason, my game became really laggy and it was quite annoying. The fight started, and we pushed the enemies back and then didn't engage. Of course, right when the enemies countered, my game decided to freeze, and I had no idea what was going on for a second. This costed me my life. I literally froze and then unfroze, and I was dead. This didn't even give me enough time to react by using a resistant potion, which would have prevented me from dying. I didn't really have another ZVZ set, so I couldn't go back and rejoin the fight. So, unfortunately, I ended up having to wait in the hideout until day 79 when everyone returned. Feeling defeated by that fight, we went into the static dungeon to start fame farming. We had a smaller group this time, but we did a lot of damage, so clearing the dungeon was pretty effective. When entering a random floor, we saw these rats trying to steal bosses like I did earlier when I had first joined the guild. We easily caught and killed one straggler who was worth a decent amount of money. We continued to fame farm on day 80 and ended up getting more people to join in. After getting a chest, we saw these random fame farmers and decided to engage on them. This went really well as we took them out super quickly and got some really juicy loot. We then ran after a few of the reds that escaped further into the dungeon and were able to catch one. He ended up leading us directly to a chest, which we got after killing the red. We then headed to the hideout to drop off loot and grabbed a golden core. I then bought a small scale set from one of the guys in the guild, and we headed back out as a huge group to do some fame farming so everyone could spec up their small scale sets. Day 81 was almost an exact repeat of day 80. We continued fame farming in the static dungeon as it began to rally. When a dungeon rallies, it upgrades the mobs a lot quicker than usual, making them worth more fame but harder to kill. We had gotten a pretty large group as more and more guildmates started to join in as we farmed. This unfortunately did decrease the amount of fame we received, but made the farm a lot safer. A random fame farm group was in the dungeon, and we engaged on them, wiping out most of their party. We then chased down the rest of them and continued to fame farm until the end of the day. Day 82 was just another static dungeon fame farm day. Nothing eventful really happened. Finally, on day 83, our fame farm session had ended. Without even stopping to bank our loot, we headed directly to an outpost and started to capture it in our HQ zone. We quickly killed the waves of enemies and then the Lord to gain control of it. We then did another outpost in a nearby zone and grabbed a purple core to end off day 83. On day 84, we started to roam around the nearby zones. We collided with some randoms that my guild knew while checking out a .4 hide. These hides are super expensive and in demand. So, of course my team gathered it while the rest of us defended the area. After doing some objectives, we went back to our hideout and did a loot split with everything that we got. We ended up doing our loot split in one of the Alliance hideouts, so I had to run all of the loot back to our own. Once the party disbanded, I decided to open a Conqueror's chest and got some really decent loot from it, including a bunch of bags of silver. Day 85 was super intense at the end of it. I started off the first 15 minutes by transporting some of my loot to the Limhurst portal. On the way back home, I tried to grab a green core and put it into the hideout. When I initially picked it up, this gang group pulled up on me, and I luckily was able to go invis to escape. Once they were gone, I was able to grab the core again, accompanied by a guildie, and we turned it into the hideout together. I realized I was doing a lot of group content lately, so I wanted to return to my roots and try doing some solo content. I headed out on day 86 to kill random boss mobs in a tier 8 zone. That was when I stumbled upon a tier 8 solo dungeon. I entered it and skipped to the bosses. I got a tome boss for the first one, which I skipped, and then on the final boss, I saw a purple chest. I wanted this chest, so I had to kill all the mobs near the boss area and then do the boss. Once they finally died, I got around 137,000 silver from the chest, which was not bad. I ended up dropping off all of my loot at my hideout, and then came back to the same exact tier 8 zone. I wanted to kill more boss mobs, and as I killed the first one, I got a 100,000 silver drop from one of the mobs. I immediately headed back to the HQ and deposited again. I tried to repeat the events of day 86, hoping that I would get lucky on day 87, so I ended up skipping to the end of a solo dungeon in the same tier 8 zone and killed the boss guarding the chest. There was only a blue chest, so very little was on the line, but I went back to clear some of the mobs. After clearing for a little while, I went back to the chest again, and I realized that it wasn't enough, so I couldn't open the chest. It wasn't worth it to run all the way back to where the mobs were at, so I just teleported out of the solo dungeon and proceeded to kill random boss mobs. I decided that I wanted to return to the hideout and transport all of the gear that I had gotten in the last couple of days. On my way to Limhurst, I saw a huge blob on the map, which made me super nervous as I was carrying a decent amount of silver on me. It was very scary, but I managed to successfully transport all of my loot to the Limhurst portal. My guildmates wanted to gank on day 88, so I geared up with my group and we headed out to a nearby zone where we planned to gank. It was a very slow day, and we ended up only getting one single kill out of the whole 30-minute interval. Thankfully, day 89 was a lot more successful. We almost collided with another group, but decided not to fight them as they looked very intimidating. Then, we started to get a lot of prey to come by. I single-handedly dismounted someone as they went into their territory where they thought they would be safe, but my friends caught them, and I was able to use my E ability just to kill him at the very last second. He dropped a lot of loot, and we continued to gank more people throughout the day. Randomly, when we were ganking a zone, I saw one of my teammates losing health badly, so I quickly ran over, and I was able to save them from a fight. Sadly, one of our guildmates died. We headed back to the Alliance HQ and deposited our loot into the Alliance Split tab, where we'd split all the loot later in the next day. After the day of ganking came to an end, we headed over to a random blue vortex where we had some rats trying to steal it. My group was able to kill one of the rats in the next zone, as two of my Alliance mates were able to catch him. I then went back and grabbed the blue core as our Alliance needed it and we needed the vortex. It was a mutual beneficial trade and it gained us a lot of might, but it costed us a lot of time. I started killing boss mobs in a tier 7 zone on day 91. The end of my 100 days was approaching quickly, so I wanted to pad my stats as much as possible. I ended up getting really good fame from doing these boss mobs, and I did them until I couldn't find any more. I then went to a tier 8 zone where a huge group of enemies with small scale fight sets ran past me. There happened to be a golden vortex just sitting in this zone. Of course, I tried to grab it and run to the next zone, which would have been my hideout zone. That's when the huge small scale group came back. I immediately dropped the core and started to mount up. Of course, my game started to lag as I ran to the exit, and one of the reds was able to catch me, which really made no sense. I ended up dying sadly. This kind of worked out as I was very close to the end of day 91, but I lost all of the loot from the circle bosses that I was doing. Day 92 was super exciting as we were massing for an Easter egg hunt. After spending around 12 minutes massing, we finally hit the road. As we roamed, there was a group that looked like they were looking for a fight. We then started to exchange Qs and Es, and the fight started off very slow. It wasn't until the enemy team decided to push us full force and only got one of our players with their engage. We then countered and got a huge clump, but didn't have enough DPS to get any kills. It was at this point that we decided to pull back, and the enemies did another engage on us. It was so annoying because I wasn't even close to the enemy tank, but somehow got pulled into their ability and instantly was killed even when using a resistance pod. I had a lot lower IP than everyone else, so I was the only one who didn't survive that engage. Once I had died and teleported to the hideout, I had to wait there until the end of the day, as I once again had no regear set to rejoin the fight. On day 93, the guild leader graciously regeared me and we headed back out. We then came across a medium chest that we stole from a random group of players. They got mad and dismounted, and it looked like they wanted to fight us. The beginning of the battle took place on a bridge, not too far from the chest, and we just kept poking them and preventing them from engaging. After a while of poking, they finally decided to commit and rush us. Using all of our defensives, my team only lost one guy. We then countered a second later and wiped like 4 of them. The battle kept going back and forth until finally I ended up dying at a random engage. The battle on day 93 was so much fun that we all regeared and decided to go back out again on day 94. It wasn't the most exciting of days though, as we ended up not getting any fights, but we did however get a few Easter egg chests and gank a couple of random players. We honestly just used this day as a gank/roam day, and it was very chill. We continued to roam and gank on day 95. Nothing too significant happened on this day. This continued into day 96 even. After getting a chest or two, I headed back to the HQ because I needed a break from playing. When I came back, I decided to do a transport and bring 500,000 worth of gear to the Limhurst portal. As usual, I sold my gear, but this time I accidentally used might points at the energy shaper to redeem an Elder's Tome of Insight. I really didn't mean to do this, as I like to get chests with the might points, but I ended up using the tome on a light crossbow set. I then grabbed some Swiftclaws that I had in my bank and transported them back to the HQ. In the middle of my transport, day 96 came to an end. I finished my transport back to the HQ on day 97. When I was doing it, I ran past a few spiky and circle bosses on the way. I dropped off my loot and headed out with a cheap set to kill these bosses, as they would definitely be worth it. I then stumbled upon a random chest and I was able to open it without anyone interfering. The chest had around 187,000 silver in it, and then I headed back to my hideout to drop off the loot and end day 97. Gate was awesome. I saw someone looking for a team to do a lower level HCE. So I quickly ran to the market and bought an expensive 6.3 Royal Cowl and Shoes of Tenacity from the Limhurst market. I then requested to join their party. We had to wait like 15 minutes to get a full group for this map, and then it finally began. For anyone who doesn't know, hardcore expeditions, or HCEs, are these incredibly hard expeditions where the mobs have an insane amount of health and deal a lot of damage. The whole team has to be very coordinated to get it done. For the first couple of pulls, the random healer in the group was using the wrong staff and stealing aggro of the mobs from the tank. This resulted in them getting killed, and then they rage quit and teleported out of the dungeon. Honestly, they didn't come with the right gear to do these types of dungeons. We were able to do the rest of the map without the healer, as our tank was incredibly good and had a lot more IP than required for the map. After the boss, we didn't have a healer, so we knew this was going to be tricky. The tank was able to glitch the boss into a spot where they wouldn't do a lot of damage until they got very low. We successfully killed the boss and finished my very first HCE. The HCE combined with waiting for 15 minutes took up all of my day 98. I felt very accomplished from doing an HCE on the previous day, so I was okay just using day 99 as a day to pad my stats. Unfortunately, it didn't really go that way. I first headed out to a nearby tier 7 zone in search of boss mobs. I scouted half of the zone and there wasn't even a single one. So I came across a 7.2 solo dungeon which looked very promising. After skipping to the end of it, I saw that the chest was complete trash, so I teleported out of the dungeon. Once out of the dungeon, I hunted down some enchanted tier 8 mobs in the zone Greenshore Bay. This really wasn't that exciting and I didn't find any boss mobs at all. It had finally come to the end of the day and I knew that it was time to teleport back to the HQ. It was day 100. There wasn't really anything to do, so I decided to calculate my total net worth and total fame. I had around 1.89 million liquid silver in my account and my total fame was around 20.35 million. My PvP fame was 525,000 fame, and my PvE fame was around 19.82 million. My gathering fame, which was not impressive, was around 10,000, and my crafting fame only around 100. I then went to check the value of my chests. The Energy Shaper chest contained around 2.8 million silver in it, the tab I had in the Hideout chest had around 2.0 million silver in it, and the chest I had in Limhurst had around 2.7 million silver in it. This brought my total Albion Online net worth to around 9.39 million silver, which wasn't bad at all. Overall, this was a very fun and exciting 100 days.